We're going to move on to our first keynote address for today. And I'm very, very excited to introduce to you David A. Bailey. Member of the International Curators Forum. I hope some of you caught either the Diasporic Pavilion in Venice at last year's Biennale, I never know how to say that, or indeed in Wolverhampton, where it came afterwards, because they are twin cities with the same soul, Venice and Wolverhampton, I think you'll find. I've been looking for little quotes that might help kind of frame some of our discussions, and I found this by a woman called Karen Kusama, who said, "I think the crux of this urgent and real conversation about representation and diversity in art making and storytelling, both behind and in front of the camera, ultimately has to do with seeing more human perspectives." And I think that's, so somebody who has been involved in us getting to see more human perspectives than many other people has been David A. Bailey. So can we please welcome him to the stage now? Thank you.
Hey everyone, how's everybody? Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Helga. That's a very good introduction, very good context. I'm going to actually read from a text because I kind of wander all over the place. So I just wanted to be more focused about what it is I want to talk about today. And hopefully anything that I'll miss out, we can kind of talk through during the break. So today, very briefly, I want to use my own journey to discuss the importance of a transformative creativity that emerges within a particular cultural context. I'll be talking about this a lot through my presentation, which is informed by a collaborative process. And I thought this quote from Stuart illustrates this point. I have to say that there are a series of books that are coming out on Stuart Hall, and I'm working on the one with Ghislaine Troados on black art. So these are actually some of Stuart's notes that actually informed Isaac Julian's book called Riot. But I was very intrigued by what Stuart says here, where he talks about, confronted by another mode of thought, made me actually aware how radically different are the visual languages in which Isaac thinks and the critical discourse and analytical work I do. It made me recognize, especially the limits of the way I think in a linear syncretal way, one idea provoking another. I am not speaking about a scientific logic here. My work is notoriously eclectic. Isaac is often thinking about the same problems, but his thought has entered a space or mode where ideas like mine develop along what we call a horizontal axis, immediately triggered or translates into associate or analog sets of images, visual sequences, and narrative devices along a vertical axis, which obey a logic of their own and are, in no sense, simply illustrative. Here, Stuart's basically saying that the kind of context which brings him and Isaac together really is a transformative context, and it's the one which allows them to think quite differently, and also a way in which he thinks quite differently about not only his own position, but thinking about Isaac's idea. And really, this really sums up in terms of what I'm going to be talking about today. And really, I'm going to kind of use this framework to talk about three kind of moments in my career as an artist, as a curator, and as a facilitator. So I want to start with my work as an artist. Now, historically, the work of diverse artists in this country has always been neatly confined to the discourse of identity politics. And I know this is going to be a key question today. But if you look historically at the work of our artists, and I've just mentioned Isaac Julian, people like Martina Atteel, Black Audio Film Collective, Zina Psadera, Steve McQueen, Serena Bimch, there's loads of others. It's quite clear that their work individually explores a diversity of concerns, and what is distinctive about their work, which connects them to other kind of non-black, kind of innovative, experimental post-war artists, and I would say people like Mara Deren and Kenneth McPherson, is that these artists use the black body within their work as a site to comment upon and make strategic inputs into the colonial terrain or Western art practices. So that's the question here, how these artists identify with this process and how they use the body, which actually marks this difference. And I say that because my work as an artist, which emerged from the 1980s, really was a period of intense activity from a new generation of diverse artists, writers, and critics. Civil disruptions around the country seem to go hand in hand with the Thatcherite era, well, no change there, which in turn had its influence on artistic production and policy. No change there. There's a mass movement within the era of black curator practice, independent publishing forums, mainstream exhibitions, collaborative ventures, and organisation development. One of the most influential bodies in the 1980s, and hands up if people can remember this, was the GLC, Greater London Council. God rest their soul. Between 1982 and 1986, through funding, institutional support, and changes in legislation, artists, writers, critics, and community groups were brought together to advise and shape local government initiatives, thus transforming the cultural landscape. My first exhibition grant was awarded by the GLC for an exhibition titled Positive Images of Black Peoples, which actually came to Birmingham in the 80s. Here are some examples of that work. I mean, I use that as the commission to kind of document what was going on at the GLC at that time. This is Gloria Cameron, this is Nervin Dean working in South London, but also juxtaposing that with images which I thought weren't necessarily popular images that were shown and in the mainstream. If we have time in the Q&A, I actually want to talk about also my role in the idea of new technologies at the GLC, but I haven't got time to do that in this presentation, but I want to kind of refer to that possibly in the Q&A, which I think will kind of bring some more context in terms of the technology aspect of this. Okay, so in the Black Experience Issue of 10/8, Dow, Georgia, where are you? Great to see you here. Heart and soul of the 10/8 movement. Stuart Hall made the point that in the 1980s we were entering in the age of innocence, which led to a great deal of activity ensuring that black subjectivities were visible and positioned at the center of artistic discourses. Now, it was from that moment that my work dramatically changes to the issue of appropriation and control, to an exploration of dismantling popular cultural imagery in magazines and postcard imagery, to an obsession around race and new technologies and the museum as a muse. So, I mean, this is like in a short space of time from what you've just seen earlier. This is like a year later from kind of working with Stuart and working with 10/8 that my work radically changes to questions of appropriation control, fragmentation, to really kind of conceptual work around using kind of magazine and kind of popular imagery around kind of fashion, to really then kind of abstracting the body and really focusing on the body as it's populated through popular cultural images such as postcards, to the question of technology, to the question of the museum and the concepts of the black body in the museum. Stuart Hall concludes in the Black Experiences issue that within this moment of visibility and position, there also has to be an opening up to the question of the complexity and heterogeneity of the black experience. It's good, Laura, that you kind of referred to that earlier in your opening remarks. An opening up which requires a critical framework which does not take for granted that it is all, everything that is there is not all good. So for me, the critical framework was working in the Max Photography Collective, which provided the context with other photographers for my work to transform further to producing images for my family album, juxtaposed against mainstream media imagery, film noir versions of race, and newspaper imagery. So again, like as Stuart talks about his relationship with Isaac and that transformational process, for me, it was really working in a collective of photographers called DMAX in the 80s, which really, my work really radically transformed, where this is a work that's now in the V&A, it's my family album, a work that's about kind of, again, about technology. I'll talk more about this in the Q&A, about my obsession around that, to really concepts about how to juxtapose mainstream media imagery within kind of my work. So really, I mean, in just talking about myself as an artist, you see there was 3 stages. I talked about the stage of the GLC, the stage of the 10/8 and Black Experiences, and then the stage of how working within a collective context in terms of DMAX really allowed me to identify with different modes of address within my work. So let's go on to my curating. So my entry in curating began with the following question. Well, I suppose curating begins with loads of questions, actually, which is as follows. Where would one go to find a historical document that tells you that there had been a significant curatorial presence of diverse art individuals, groups, and organisations that have helped to redefine what constitutes British art. Because of the severe lack of a coherent picture of the curatorial history, one that includes the mainstream major galleries, as well as self-organised initiatives by diverse artists who have made it an important part of their life to curate exhibitions of diverse work. Over the last 25 years, there's only been a handful of under-resourced organisations and individuals, some which have been really present in this region, which has constantly taken a lead in this area. Since the 1990s, I've been curating mostly large-scale projects which have worked across a number of artistic disciplines, highlighting up and coming artists. I did Isaac Julian's first commission in a gallery. I did Stephen Queen's first commission in Mirage in 1995 at the ICA. I did a collaborative show with Richard Powell and the Harlem Renaissance at the Hayward Gallery in 97. But I mean, recently I'm concerned with developing exhibitions that look at a generation of artists, and I use the word generation quite loosely, who are producing works since the post-war period that are now entirely forgotten and written out of various forms of art history that this sector produces. It is in this context that I see my curatorial projects as a development of my concern of working on shows which profile key innovative artists that have made an impact on the art in Britain since the post-war period. And I'll just talk briefly. I mean, this is a show I did on Frantz Fanon, Mirage at the ICA, which is Steve McQueen's work, 5 Easy Pieces. We also included works, early films that dealt with race, such as Blonde Venus with Marlene Dietrich. Then there was the Harlem Renaissance show for the Hayward Gallery, which included works by Porcelain in terms of Josephine Baker, juxtaposed with a really amazing project by Orson Welles called The Voodoo Macbeth. Then there was a collaborative project I worked on with Vel for Innova, with Janine Ali and Zina Sadira, which uses an amazing work of Faisal Abdullah, to the amazing work of the group show AAS. This work was also shown at the Walsall Art Gallery in Birmingham and caused a lot of controversy, which I can talk about later. Then there was work around the Black Moving Cube, which kind of focused on commissioning artists to work across moving image and film as an installation environment. Can't really see that properly. Then there was Back to Back, which is really like a sequel to the Harlem Renaissance show, which was about the blaxploitation movement and the visual arts. And then there's my Caribbean work, such as the Caribbean Pavilion for the Liverpool Biennale. And then there's my working in collaboration with Platform, with Amnesty International, Greenpeace, on a public art commission for the environmental activist Ken Saro-Wiwa. It's just to give you an idea of all the different ways in which I worked in collaborative environments in terms of my curatorial projects. Yet, I have to say, out of all of my curatorial collaborations and the cultural context that transformed me as a curator, this is absolutely true. It's not because, I'm trying to suck up to Birmingham. This is so true. It is 10/8, and it's basically 10/8, which I really understand the context of my curatorial position, but also the importance of photography. Now, you have to understand that in the 1980s, photography occupied a really unique position, particularly in this region. It wasn't, I would say, London. I would say this region was actually the kind of Harlem Renaissance area in terms of black arts movement, but also around photography. And also, you remember, it was also one of the bases of where Stuart was based in the Birmingham School. So it is in photography, particularly in Stuart's 10/8 essays, where Stuart discusses how this medium has been explored differently by a range of black British artists' work from who have been pushing the boundaries of the art from the 1970s. For Stuart, black photographic work has been one of the key sites for critical debate on areas of sexuality, particularly in the work of Rotimi Fani-Kayode, who was first published in 10/8. In the 1970s, the use of documentary form by many photographers has to be seen within a wider political framework as part of the attempt to reposition the guaranteeing centres of knowledge seemingly presented by realism and the classic realist texts. I mean, examples of this, there's loads. I mean, you can look at the work of Horace Ove, but I mean, you don't even have to go any further to look at the diverse community and kind of documentary work by the great and only godfather that he is, Evangeline Burke. And also the work of people like Ingrid Pollard, who focuses on black female creativity. And also people like Ahmet Francis, particularly with his Black Triangle Diasporic project. Now, by the 1980s, the campaign to contest negative images with positive ones have moved on to an inquiry into the politics of the image itself. The question of authorship, essentialism, and cultural nationalism was critiqued in relation to photographic images of black people in the public sphere, and there were many photographic images of race produced by what was then, not so much now, the famous campaign by Benetton was very kind of crucial at that moment as somewhere which was contesting all of that. It is here where black photography and the black art movement produced its most innovative and exciting work that explored complex debates on fine art, practices, gender, sexuality, and being black and British. So for me, 10/8 was not only at the center of these debates, but was crucial in advancing, particularly in new technologies, where advancement in digital technologies not only transformed the shape and size and look of the publications they produced, but also allowed a democratic process in the design and editing of the journal. I mean, that's something which myself and Dara can talk a lot of, but I mean, what was really interesting about the magazine was not only did it kind of produce amazing kind of content, but also, and allowed lots of visibility from different voices, but at the same time, it actually used technology, digital technology that was emerging in publishing to actually transform the magazine, but at the same time allowed for a more democratic editing process. So particularly with this issue, Critical Decade, this was something which was really a democratic edited process in terms of delivering this magazine, which we could only have done with the technology that was available at that time. Okay, how am I doing for time?
You're all right, you're doing really well.
Oh, great.
I've not even given you my high five warning.
Yeah, you meant to come out and slap me in the face, but yeah, I'm doing great. Okay, so I'm coming to the last bit, and I'm glad I've got more time for this because I actually need a lot more time for this. So, I'm just trying to think how I can kind of think. Okay, so I'm going to talk about my way of actually, how I kind of think about ways in which I'm working as a facilitator. So this is a big one, and actually I could have made this actually my keynote. A lot of people who don't know me, or only know me as a photographer and as a curator, don't know a lot of my work in terms of new technology. When the GLC was writing its cultural industries papers in the 1980s, it developed technology institutes called the London New Technology Network, MyTag, Minorities Information Technology Group, ArtTech, and I was part of all this, but I'll talk more about that, possibly in the Q&A. I was also part of other kind of organisations that developed, such as Autograph, Innova, Stuart Hall Foundation, but I think the one that kind of makes sense for today is ICF, the International Curators Forum, which was formed in 2007. The project has been inspired by my journey as an independent curator working in England over the past 30 years. God, past 30 years, that means I was 5 when I started. My aspiration is that we create a forum to address a number of pressing issues for contemporary curators. Most important for me is to highlight the discontinuity and absence of historical documents that acknowledge the significant curatorial presence of diasporic individuals, groups, and organisations which have helped redefine British art. I forgot to mention, Helga, that was one of the categories that I should have put my hand up to, curators, but I kind of included it under artists. Over the last 25 years, only a handful of under-resourced organisations and individuals have consistently taken a lead in this area, and that I felt in 2007 at the time was right to reflect upon existing curatorial initiatives and blue sky opportunities that can be developed for curatorial research projects. And in this context, we also have to consider professional development, which I know we will be talking about today, networking structures, which I know we will be talking about today, which needs to be examined and enhanced, and I can't talk enough about how important those contexts are. For me, ICF, International Curators Forum, is a place to readdress omissions, erase stories, and consider the relationship between arts activity and curatorial practices. The forum is about profile, cultivation, strategic intervention, but it's also about establishing mid-career and, most importantly, emerging curators of substantial space for critical reflection, research, dialogue, experimentation, and exchange. With continued support, the ICF will become a wider project that develops a strong infrastructure and sustains a progressive and engaging dialogue between British art and the international stage. An example of this work, and Helga kind of referred to this in her opening remarks, is our Diasporic Pavilion, which was co-founded by Nicola Green, David Lammy, and Peter Clayton, and co-curated by Jessica Taylor, and the Beyond the Frame projects. I'm going to show some images with these projects and kind of talk you through them. So the idea is that, over a 2-year period, you take 12 artists, you take 10 curators, and then this is our launch in November 2016, and then you mentor them with another set of curators and artists, and you take them on a journey to really allow them the space and time to experiment, but also to feel confident in the field and to aspire to kind of greater depths. And with the artists, which I'll talk mostly about, is we profile the work at the Venice Biennale, at the Diasporic Pavilion, and the idea was to use the idea of, if people understand about Venice and the Venice Biennale and the structure of national pavilions, we thought we will have our own national pavilion and we'll call it a Diasporic Pavilion. And the idea originally was to have all the emerging artists to exhibit and be launched at the pavilion. But through discussions with the mentors, and some of the mentors, this is the opening, was Ellen Gallagher, she was mentoring Barbie, Abbas Sadira, Isaac Julian was mentoring Larry Achipong. They actually all exhibited together. So it became like 19 artists in one space, mentors exhibiting alongside mentees. Zinka Shorbani, who's mentoring Kimathi Donker. So these are the opening, which really create a kind of an energy and a buzz and a kind of a new way of thinking about structuring the idea of the diaspora within a kind of national, international, globalized structure of the Venice Biennale. These are just some of the installation shots of some of the works in the pavilion. And the idea was the artists actually made work which was very bespoke to the actual space. I mean, like, the bathroom everywhere, the hallways. I mean, this is Barbara Walker's work. This is Khadija Sai's work. Hugh Locke, mentor, Susan Pusenlock, mentee. Again, artists like working together. Then it came to Wolverhampton, where we kind of treated the Wolverhampton Arts Gallery as a kind of as a pavilion. And again, the work really found its way in terms of being very bespoke. So you saw Susan's curtains, which kind of have a different iteration. Larry's work was more kind of white cubish. Michael's work was really more expansive. And I think what was interesting about Wolverhampton was the work was allowed to breathe. Kimathi works was merged into the collection. So I don't really want to talk about something which is, about something which is good, but something which is, it's not so much it's tragic, but also is part of what I'm trying to say about the transformation, about the journey which we have and the context in which we're working within. In 2015, we took a number of artists and curators, some sponsored by Peter Clayton and Nicola Green, to Venice for the Venice Biennale, and one of them was Khadija Sayed, and Khadija was inspired to the fact that she felt that whatever was going to happen next, that in 2017, that she wanted to exhibit at the Venice Biennale, and we kind of made that happen. Khadija was such a warm spirit that not only did she transform the pavilion, but at the opening speech, remember, these are the artists and the mentors, Isaac Julian, Ellen Gallagher, they all chose Khadija to speak on behalf of all the artists. So alongside Nick Sirota, who opened it with myself, Khadija spoke for all the artists and curators because she embodied the whole spirit of the project, and everybody loved and trusted her. And her journey was just about to begin, and then tragically, just a few weeks later, Grenfell happened, and she died with her mother in Grenfell. And the sadness is that even though the legacy of the ideas and the work we live on, her studio and all of her work was on that floor in Grenfell. And that what's interesting and real about that is that, you know, it's important to remember that how people work, the context in people, how they work, and then the context in which they have to be transformed from that work to another scenario, i.e. Grenfell to Venice and then back to Grenfell, is very important to remember in terms of where people are coming from and where people need to be going to in the future. So I just want to, thank you, my conclusion comments. So bearing this in mind, we come to the June 2018 this event. So I want to be very, very clear that, you know, I really want this event to be about the gathering that explores collegiate ways of working, communicating with each other as artists, curators, critics, writers, and culture producers. I think there are 3 key issues in my capacity as a curator which I really would like this event to address, which is infrastructural development. I cannot stress the importance of that. Institutional continuity. We need continuity so that younger, emerging, and people who are forgotten can come through. And of course, none of this can happen without financial support, which of course I feel we need to talk about, but we need to bring all of those 3 things together. You know, this for me is certainly the relation to curatorial practices in the UK and its relationship to globalization, which for me, we need to be engaged with and preoccupied given what's happening in the world today. If anything at all comes from this event, it has to be that there has to be forums which address or focus on the relationship between arts activity in all of its various guises. And for me, it's important to talk about the relationship to areas of facilitation and curatorial practice. I mean, we should talk about profile, cultivation, strategic intervention, but we also should allow the established mid-career, and most importantly, emerging to emerge, and allow a substantial period for critical reflection, you know, research, dialogue, experimentation, and exchange to enable us to think about a much bigger project to realize in the future, and working equally alongside the institutional support, intellectual stimulation, and leadership that this event can provide. So, welcome, and let's really make this discussion happen, and let's start the discussion throughout the day. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Beautifully to time. So the observant amongst you will have noticed that we are running a little late. I'm going to do some Q&A now, and then we'll probably go to a coffee break straight away because, you know, it'll be that time, won't it? But I will announce the so we're just going to slightly reorder the programme, and I'll let you know all about that shortly. I'm very tempted to ask you, as a kick-off question, what happened in Walsall, but I won't for now. I'll just, first of all, because rather than me hog the mic, we have the Debbie McGee of Hello Culture, everybody, Chris Brown. Yes, round of applause, yes, indeed. No, next time. Are there any burning questions? There was so much in that, and I really, I had a sneak preview. I had a chance to read it. I know that I was dense. There was lots of information in that. Are there any questions out there for people who want to pick up on any of the bits? Mr. Sargent, right at the back.
Right at the back.
Also, you can use the break to kind of grab me and have conversations as well.
Good.
Thank you.
Hi, Ian.
Hello, David. How are you?
All right.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for your presentation. One of the key things that you were saying was why Birmingham, West Midlands was, you know, kind of a significant place for arts practice. I wanted you to kind of probably extend a little bit more on why do you think that happened in Birmingham at that particular time? And can I sneak a little one in as well? Just quickly. And then how do you think institutions are responding to that idea going forward, or presently and going forward, in terms of responding to black arts practice, or beyond that, or diverse arts practice in that regard?
Sorry, and both of those. So why Birmingham back then?
Yeah,
and what you think about it now? Birmingham now as well?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I think three things, Ian. I think, unlike London, Birmingham, definitely in the 70s, which then changed in the 80s, had a particular infrastructure which was no other around the world. I mean, where would you have somebody at a university that creates a kind of a new discipline, which is cultural studies, and alongside that, it's just not, then kind of leaves to go to the Open University, but leaves a legacy which is then picked up by Paul Gilroy, Petit Palmer, and with The Empire Strikes Back, So already there was a legacy there. And if that wasn't enough, then parallel to that, there are a whole range of art schools. I mean, my partner Sonia Boyce, she went to Stourbridge, which were beginning to kind of address the issue with Eddie Chambers, Keith Piper, Gary Stewart. So it was like two things were happening in parallel to that. And alongside that, people, residents from Birmingham, who were kind of like Vanley Burke, who saw, and it should be seen as the Bert Hardy in terms of documentary photography, who was trying to kind of document and archive that work, which is absolutely wonderful, because if you look at Vanley's work, you can actually see images of Stewart in kind of, his office at the Centre for Cultural Studies. So Vanley becomes the framework for all of that. And then also the other stuff is, I can't even begin to talk about the idea of music, UB40, and the idea of performance, Lenny Henry. So when I did the project on the Harlem Renaissance, I looked at the idea that Britain was a really a Renaissance period, but actually, like, Birmingham was like Harlem, if you see what I mean. In the way in which Harlem, with Langston Hughes and Aaron Douglas and Zora Neale Hurston, Birmingham had all of that creative energy. But also, what was also important was, in terms of technology, the means of production, it also had print, it also had 10/8, So it was all of these things that came together. So that's your first question. What was the other question?
So that was it then, and what's your, what do you think about the scene, as it were, now? To the extent that I guess you know about it.
I say it's much more fragmented. So the idea, I think, unfortunately, London has appropriated a lot of what happened here, in terms of how people have left, people have migrated, which is actually, it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. But I think I feel very, not sad about, I feel it's very tragic, is that how this region always gets seen as, or always gets stereotyped as a region which is a depressed region, and which is always undergoing transformation in terms of building work, and not really seen as a very particular, and also it gets seen as a very particular region when the Arts Council wants to do a project or wants to do a conference around diversity. This seems to be the only region that they want to do it in, because it's like, we're going to go to the depressed region to do that.
The cold spot. We're known as the cold spot.
But I just feel that that's part of the problem, and that's not your problem. I think it's a problem how the regions have developed, and how somehow the success of Birmingham, unfortunately, or the West Midlands, how other regions have benefited from that, but also how we've not been able to have that dialogue to kind of give back, or have that dialogue to say, well, actually, what can we do together? And I think this region has actually, somehow not been able to been supported from that. I think, Vanley Burke should be like honoured as one of the most important photographers this country has ever produced. I don't understand why he's not recognised as somebody who's been practicing well over 30 to 40 years in terms of, that work. I mean, it's just crazy. And Barbara Walker, who is of a similar age of myself, is only now being recognised for the amazing, massive wall drawings and drawing skills that she brings to that craft. But that's been here for decades.
Ruth? Thank you, Ian.
Hi, that was really great. Thank you so much. Could you tell us a little bit more about the Minorities Information Technologies Awareness?
Thank you.
What happened there?
So I have to admit, as mad as he is now, Ken Livingstone was quite a revolutionary character in the 80s, and when he was leader of the GLC. The first thing he did was to get Robin Murray, a kind of social technologist, to write a paper about the cultural industries, which was, for me, a new term. And for Robin Murray, it was the only way to invest in the future of the infrastructure of London and the country was to invest in the cultural industries. And the cultural industries for Robin Murray was to set up new technology networks under the umbrella of the London New Technology Network, which were basically areas where there'll be across London, there will be all of these networks, which were basically literally spaces. Were your spaces. Literally, these were your spaces. They were funded by the GLC, they were funded by the ER, the European Regional Development Fund, European Union, and they worked closely across Europe, but mostly focused around London, with similar spaces which allowed workshops, small, medium firms who were working in kind of new technologies, but also they did conferences, seminars, and they also tried to kind of encourage young people to get involved in kind of new technologies, which at that point there were two roads into. One was actually people actually making things. In those days, people actually made computers, literally. So it was an idea that you could actually make your own computer, and you could actually design your own board and stuff like that. And then the other way was then to use the technology, as in sound, music, video, using the technology to kind of make new artwork. So out of that came a group called Minorities Information Technology Awareness Group, which, that's a good ringtone, which really was, again, thinking about if all of these things are happening, then how are diverse people going to be involved in this? So MyTag was set up under the umbrella of the GLC to develop that, and I was its director in relation to that. So I almost feel like I should talk more about that, which is more about this scenario than that. But that was quite important for me because I was able to then bring into ideas around representation. It was like a no-brainer. I was able to bring in ideas about representation, but also think about ways in which digital technologies can enhance the arts.
And for those of you with memories long enough, you may remember back in Birmingham we had the Trade Union Resource Council.
That's right.
Turk, which was where you could get, it was funded by the trade unions. Young people, if you don't know what a trade union is, look it up on Google. It was funded by the trade union, and people could get access to the technology. And of course, the thing about, we talk about a digital revolution now, but now we carry around in our pockets on our smartphones more access to audio-visual equipment than that that used to take up 4 rooms. Exactly. That you could go and borrow, and massive editing equipment. Yeah. Now you can do things on your phone on the bus. Yeah. It's just extraordinary. Yeah. And that's part of, so while there was a bit that provided, which was access to the kit, what it also did, which everybody walking around with it in their pockets in their smartphones doesn't do, is the community.
Yes.
Well, not in such an obvious way, and having those people around you, I think, was also a massive part of it.
And just to add to that, Helga, the third partner in the relationship for that was the TUC. That was the third, because it was all about industry and getting people to there was jobs and create new jobs in the cultural industry.
Yeah, and there was a a big sort of education push through from the unions. You had a question? I've got some more time. Another question? Lady there.
Thank you. Hiya, I'm Louise.
Hi.
I was just interested particularly in 10.8 and the role of print versus digital these days. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on print and whether, like, the physicality of printed paper, is it still relevant? Well, I think it is, but yeah, I just wanted to...
In what way?
Yeah.
I think what was really good about, so I'm going to answer a long way to kind of respond to your question, and maybe Darryl might have something to add. I think what's really interesting about how 10.8 used the technology was that 10.8 had people who were in love with the print. So I would say Derek Bishton was he wasn't an old school newspaper editor, but he loved the idea of the printed word, and also how, because he was interested in kind of imagery, how images were printed in publications. And in some ways, I would say Derek and people like Daryl were interested in the idea that you don't necessarily have to think about the white cube. The publication was the white cube, hence why the images needed to be like that, because they were pushing the technology to make it like that, because basically, the publication was like a white cube in terms of if you look at the reproductions. The magazine used to be it used to be newspaper style, didn't it? Then it was A4, and then with the technology, with digital dialogues, we then made the magazine that's literally the size of 10.8, which I don't know if people understand. 10.8 is the maximum in terms of, where's Rebecca, was the maximum size with the negative, which could give you the maximum stuff for that. So the idea came with old school, with new school, but what was quite important with that was that the digital technology was used to enhance the print, but also for the editorial process. I was involved in Black Experiences, but most of the editorial really was taken over by the team and by the designer. By the time we got with digital dialogues, by the time we came to the last one, Critical Decade, we were all involved in the editorial process and in the design of the magazine because of the technology. So for instance, if you have a copy of 10.8 and if you have a copy of Critical Decade, and if you look at the end, which has a chronology of what happened in the 80s up until the 90s, the colour of the chronology changes from one colour to another. And the reason that was that having a conversation with Daryl and with Derek, I said, wouldn't it be interesting that from 79, the chronology changes from blue to red, i.e. from Conservative to Labour. And then Derek goes, well, actually, we can just look at that now and just do that now. And we just looked at it and did that and said, actually, this really works and we should do that. Do you see what I mean? So in that way, the technology was really good. I couldn't have done that when I did Black Experiences in 85, 86. But by 1990 and 92, we were doing that. And so I would say two things. One, that because the magazine was a white cube, print was really important because the importance of what the magazine wanted to do was enhance the photography as well as the word, but mostly the images. And secondly, that it was important to allow for multiple voices to come through, and that if we had continued, no doubt, and Darryl would probably say this, we would have probably gone totally online if we had that funded.
It was a time before the internet.
Yeah.
No, exactly. Well, I was just about to say, if there's any terms that are unfamiliar, young people, if there's any terms that are familiar, 10.8, that's inches, that's imperial measurement. Look it up. A Labour government, that might be unfamiliar to you. Look it up. Hold on to just because it's all right, because the live stream won't get it otherwise, Darryl, that's all.
There are unpublished 10.8s for these guys, and it was a time before the internet, but more importantly, they still exist and they haven't gone anywhere, and we still got them in digital formats, which may or may not still be here, but they're in
they're somewhere in the cloud.
SciQuest discs and all sorts of things. So give somebody a job here and a PhD, and they can transcribe 4 unpublished 10.8s, really, including Sadie Plants, which is something we're going to do at some point. So if Reginda's got any volunteers?
Okay, marvellous. Thank you, Darryl. Okay, well, actually, unless there's a really burning question, I'm going to give you all an extra 2 minutes for coffee, give us our time to catch up. It's been great to hear 10.8, all of that amazing history, but also with, I think what David has done is very nicely put us into the context of exploring the future, building, standing on the shoulders of giants, as we have. Oh, sorry?
Just
yeah.
one more thing.
Yeah.
So just one more thing to add then, actually. At the end of your presentation, David, there was a lot of why isn't this happening, what hasn't happened, and the difference between, we're talking, I think Ian was asking about what was different then and what's different now.
Yeah.
It was a call to action, that's how I read your presentation.
Yes.
And I'm not going to leave this as a question, but it might be something everyone in the room wants to talk about. I made a bet with myself as to which arts organisations in this city who talk about diversity like would be in the room. You are all here. Rob, Steve, Louise, Craig. Basically, I won my own bet. Every arts organisation I knew that would come is here. So you might want to look at who's not in the room. Because this is a very diverse audience. We've got a very diverse set of speakers today, and somebody said, how did you manage to do that? How do you not know people? What boxes do these people live in?
Yeah.
So I'm going to come back to your call to action, because at the end of the day, this isn't about discussion. This is happening, and this is what's happening with everyone from you and right through to the end of the day. So my question is for everyone in the room, who's not in the room?
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you very much. One of the things that you start to see if you start to think about identity is also that once you start to name or identify for yourself, that's the first step into finding community. And certainly along the day, I hope that you will get the opportunity to build community for yourself as well. Not necessarily by the obvious ways that you might identify yourself, but by more subtle and interesting ways as well.